guys, welcome back to my channel. Simone here, and today we're going to be doing my favourite books of 2018. I have a top 10 list that isn't in any particular order, it's just the 10 books that I loved the most. There are a few other books that I gave 5-star to, but these ones are the 10 that really stick in my mind and that I really loved this year. So let's get started. So of course I don't have any of these books anymore because I don't keep books, as I've said before, but I will put pictures up on the screen to let you know which ones I'm talking about as I'm talking about them. So the first book that is on my top 10 list of the year is Geekerella by Ashley Poston. Now this was a book that I found in my local charity shop just after it came out. I think it was a 2017 release. I'm not 100% sure, I know it was quite relatively recently. And I really loved this book. To be honest with you, I didn't really expect too much when I started reading it, but it really drew me in and I found it to be very compelling. This basically follows a girl who, I actually can't remember her name. I'm really bad at names and stories, by the way. Sorry about that. This follows a girl who essentially is the kind of like Cinderella, I guess, because it's a Cinderella retelling. And her father died, and he used to be kind of he used to run this kind of comic convention where people cosplayed and everybody got together and it was really fun. So he died and she is now living with her evil stepmother and her 2 stepsisters, and basically she's a massive fan of this show, which is where the cosplay comes from. I think it's called I can't even remember the name of the show, it's like Star something, not 100% sure, can't remember. Anyway, she's a big fan of this show and they're making a remake of it with a guy who she really doesn't like, the actor, and then that kind of, it's from 2 perspectives. So it's from his perspective where he's starting the kind of remake and he's filming it and whatever, and it's from her perspective. And she also starts to text somebody and she doesn't know who they are, and it's kind of about that. It's very interesting, it's a really good story. I really like the way it was told. It does talk a lot about grief as well, because you have the fact that her dad died and she's wanting to do this thing where he's kind of, it's a big part of where his life was. So that was really nice. It did make me cry a little bit towards the end as well, very sad. But a really great book, and definitely one that I would recommend, especially because I think a lot of people probably turned off by the fact it's called like Geekerella. It doesn't sound really like some people's cup of tea, but I still really loved it, and I think it's one of those sort of contemporary, sort of a little bit, it's not magical, but it has that magical feeling to it, and I just really loved it. So yeah, it's definitely on my top 10 list. The next one is probably the only one that is in an order, and I think this is probably my favourite book of 2018. I give one book tends to be the top spot. So in 2016 it was The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, in 2017 it was 6 of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, and in 2018 it is Educated by Tara Westover. And I like the fact that this is a non-fiction book because I have been loving non-fiction so much this year. But this book to me just was amazing. I absolutely loved reading it. I also read it at a time where I was very excited to be reading. I read it during the Borrow-a-thon, which is at the beginning of November, and I also read it during Non-Fiction November, which I took part in for the first time this year. So it also, not only is it a great book and it was a story that I liked a lot to read, it also, I read it at a time which was just perfect for me. So basically Educated follows Tara Westover in her life, and it shows her when she was younger, but basically she grew up in a family of believers of the end of days. So basically her father and her family kind of were stockpiling for the end of days, and they don't believe in the government, they're very much against the healthcare system. They're very much just against kind of regulation of things. They don't go to school, none of them are registered, they don't have birth certificates, any of that. And basically she tries to break free of that a little bit and educate herself, and she ends up going to Cambridge, which is incredible, and she's now I think a doctor, she has a PhD and all this, and it's really interesting. I really love to hear her. It was very difficult to read some parts because when she was younger her oldest brother was very violent towards her, and it can be quite difficult. I don't know who was her oldest brother. He was definitely one of her brothers, older than her, and he was very violent. A lot of the family were sort of disowning people who tried to kind of break out of the group they were in, and so it can be really difficult to read. It's definitely a story that comes with some trigger warnings, I would say, for violence. It's hard to read, but it was also incredibly enlightening. It was very interesting to read about somebody completely different to myself. It's not a lifestyle that I've ever really read about, and it was very interesting to me. To me it was quite shocking because it's not something I would ever think about doing in terms of like completely taking myself off of the government's radar. But I think it was really fascinating. I think Tara Westover is an incredible woman. It was so interesting to read her speak because I think her writing and everything, she's a very, very talented, intelligent woman. And I think it would have been a shame had she not have been able to sort of realise her potential in that way. But yeah, it was really, really interesting. Definitely my favourite book of the year, and yeah, 100% I would recommend this book out of any of the others I talk about today. I mean, I'd recommend them all, but that one was great. The next one is a bit of a surprise, and it's not one I would have thought would be in this list, to be honest, when I first started reading it, and that is Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson. Now, you may all know that I have had a interesting relationship with Brandon Sanderson. I tried to read The Way of Kings and really didn't like it, couldn't get on with it, didn't understand where it was going really. And if you watched my January TBR that went up on Monday, you'll know that I'm planning on reading The Final Empire this month, which is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy. And generally high fantasy terrifies me, and I really struggle to kind of read it. And I think that I went into Steelheart thinking I'd give it a go because it's a shorter book. It's only like 300 to 400 pages, as opposed to a lot of the other ones I have, which are massive. And honestly, I loved the book. I loved Steelheart so much. It was really, really well written. I could really see where people were coming from when they said that Brandon Sanderson was incredible. Basically this follows a boy, I think his name's Daniel, and his dad is killed by his father is killed by Steelheart, who is I forget what they call them. I'm really rubbish at this, sorry guys. It's basically, they have like superpowers, I can't remember, like I said. Basically he's killed by Daniel's father is killed by Steelheart, one of these people, and that means then that basically Daniel tries to get in with the group called the Reckoners, who are trying to bring down kind of supervillains. I forget, like I said, again, what the name of them is. But they have these certain powers, and it's about that basically. He tries to get in with this group, and it's what happens, and honestly, it's so good. And I think sometimes, like I said, high fantasy terrifies me. I get very, very nervous to read it because I often find it goes completely over my head. I don't understand what's happening. I can't really work it out. I don't know where I'm sat with it. And this one just was really kind of like well explained. The world building in it was great, which meant that I completely understood where we were all the time. And I just think it was really interesting. The relationships between all the characters was really fun. There was some like heartbreaking parts. There were some really lovely parts. There was some funny parts. And yeah, I just really, really enjoyed it. And I think it was one of those kind of ones where I thought, you know what, I think I can actually try and read some more Brandon Sanderson now, because I feel like that was a great one. I don't know if I'm going to enjoy the others, I'll see, because like I said, I'm hoping to read the first book in the Mistborn trilogy this month, but yeah, we'll see. But like I said, I really, really enjoyed Steelheart, and it's definitely on my top 10 list of 2018. Next up is Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty, and I believe this is the first Liane Moriarty book that I've ever read, and I will definitely hopefully be rectifying that this year because I really, really loved this book. I think the reason why this was so hyped and talked about is the fact that this came out as a TV series this year with Nicole Kidman, Shailene Woodley and Reese Witherspoon in, and I do really want to watch that because, as I said, I really, really loved this book. But for me, the book was just magical. Basically, it follows a load of parents, namely 3 main characters, who are obviously played by those 3 in the movie, or the TV series, and basically it's about, they've all got children that go to the same nursery, I think, and something happens between one of the children and between 2 of the children basically, and it kind of has this like roll-on effect, and somebody dies, and you don't know at the beginning if it's a male or a female who dies. You don't know who dies, you don't know what actually happened, you don't know any of that. You just know that somebody died at this kind of like Christmas party. I think it was a Christmas party. It was definitely a party of some kind. To do with the school, and basically and like I said, at the very start it tells you that somebody died, and it's kind of the police talking about certain things, and then they are investigating as they go, and it's really, really interesting. I loved the main characters in this. All 3 of them were really, really fascinating, and to be honest with you, I never saw what was going to happen until the very end. Like, I just figured it out, then I was still, even though I knew the kind of like twist, I guess, I still couldn't work out who died, because although you find out the kind of like shock bit, there's still a whole part of the book left to go of somebody dying. So yeah, it's really, really great. I absolutely loved it, and I was on 10 hooks the whole time, wanting to find out what happened and who died and who did what, and absolutely, honestly amazing. The way Liane Moriarty can weave characters together and make you care about loads of them, because this is not a story where you'll like root for one person. This is a story where you'll root for many people, and you're constantly hoping that it's not that person that dies. Is honestly, is so good. I absolutely loved it, and I would implore you to read it. And I would like to know, what Liane Moriarty book should I read next? I do have Truly Madly Guilty, but should I read that next, or should I read a different one? Let me know. Next up is Small Great Things by Jodi Picoult, and I love Jodi Picoult's writing. I've always liked it. I often find that she has quite biased books though, because she tends to write about very big topics like the death penalty or organ donation or stuff like that, and so she's very much often on one or the other side. This one was absolutely amazing, and I think it's a great, I think it came out this year or last year, and I think it's a great book for this time that we're in right now. It basically follows a black nurse who is a midwife, and she has been a midwife for years and years and years and loves her job and is very good at her job. And then she is in charge, or she's kind of taking control of the a little boy has just been born to a white couple who are extremists, basically white supremacists, and they have a very prejudiced view of her, and so they tell her that they don't want her anywhere near their child, they don't want her touching their child, they don't want her there at all. Anyway, so she is essentially told by her superior she's not allowed to go near this child, which in itself is obviously a horrible, horrible thing. But then the child has a small procedure basically just after it's born, and starts to have issues breathing and things, and basically she's the only person that's been left in this room, and she doesn't know whether she should help the baby or not help the baby. The last thing that happens before this baby dies is she touches him, and essentially when the baby dies, the parents decide to sue her or sue the hospital, but the hospital is sort of like pushing it onto her. So then it becomes this whole race row basically, or story, and it's really, really, really interesting. I actually felt sick reading this. Like, I was reading it and I just had this like heart in my throat. Like, I felt sick reading it. I felt very uncomfortable, not because the story was bad, but because it was so good that it made me really think about the way, like, it actually upsets me that people do have that mindset and are that way, and I really struggle with that. Like, I can't understand where that comes from. But anyway, the point of that is, it's such a good story. I think it was very well written, very well researched, and there was lots of different points in there. There was bits about the law, which I really enjoyed, because as we all know, I did a law degree. I haven't many times mentioned that this year. Not actually that many this year, but this, you know, since my channel started. But yeah, I absolutely loved this book. 100% would recommend it. I think that you will really, really enjoy it. And yeah, I definitely think that it's important, especially like I said, in today's kind of like political climate. Yeah, I absolutely love this and I would recommend it. And then another one that's in quite a similar vein, and I think if you like one that you'll probably like the other, is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. Now this is kind of like the YA version, and Small Great Things is an adult version. They're not obviously the same story at all, but there is similar points in this that I think are really interesting. So I think if you've read one and you fancy giving the other one a go, I definitely would. The Hate You Give, most people know what it's about. It's definitely a big book this year, and I absolutely loved it, and I definitely agreed with all the hype that it got. This follows Star, who is a incredibly talented student who has kind of two separate lives. She has the kind of, she goes to a primarily white school in a very kind of like posh neighbourhood, and so she has a very different personality, and she kind of conducts herself in a different way. And then she lives with the rest of her family in a slightly less well-to-do area that's kind of much more predominantly black people. And so like I said, she has two very different sides. Anyway, she goes to a party one night, and her friend gives her a lift home, and he actually gets shot by a policeman while she is in the car. And he doesn't have any weapons on him. It just it seems to be because he's predominantly because he's black, and the police officer was a white man. And then she then has to decide whether she wants to come forward and kind of like tell her story, or whether she doesn't want to be any part of it. And it means that the two parts of her world start to sort of collide a little bit. And this again is a book that made me feel sick as I was reading it, for the same reasons. I think that we should be way past the time of segregating people or like, I hate it. I actually hate it. Racism, I don't understand. I really can't understand the prejudice, but anyway, that's for a different time. But yeah, basically this story was just a wonderful, its own voice is Angie Thomas is a black woman who is incredibly hilarious, by the way. If you follow her on Twitter, she's amazing, honestly, she's so funny. I absolutely love reading this book because it was very true. It was written, to start off with, I struggled with the first maybe chapter or so, because it's written in very kind of like colloquial language, but I started to kind of understand where it was coming from, and once I realised that it was kind of supposed to show the difference between her two kind of like worlds, I thought it was really well done. It was really, really interesting. Again, I loved this book, thought it was absolutely really well written, and I 100% implore you to read this if you haven't already. Next up is one that I'm pretty sure me and Nicole from A Beautiful Chaos of Books can probably take out shares in this book, because we mention it so many times, and you probably know what's coming. Can you guess? I want to talk about Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman, which is definitely one of my favourite, probably the second favourite book, and just undereducated. But I adored this book. I have a lot of positive feelings. I really relate to Eleanor. I think she's so amazing, and she struggled with a lot of like mental health issues, which I do as well. And basically this is about a woman named Eleanor Oliphant who has a very simple life in that she goes to work Monday to Friday. When she leaves work on Friday evening, the last person she speaks to is the bus driver, and she doesn't talk to anybody else all weekend until the bus driver picks her up again on Monday morning. So she's quite a lonely woman, but she just really kind of gets on with it. She does drink quite a lot, but she doesn't really think of it as an issue. And then one day something happens that means she has to talk to one of her co-workers, and then she starts to make friends in some way, and she almost, it's that like social awkwardness, social anxiety, which again, completely understand. I have incredibly bad social anxiety, so I get that. Yeah, amazing. Honestly, this book, if you have never struggled, if you've struggled with any mental health issues before, I think this book will help you, or at least speak to you a little bit. I think if you haven't struggled with mental health illness, this will help you to understand people that have. Absolutely loved this. Gail Honeyman, I think this was her debut novel, so I cannot wait to see what else she writes, because if that's her debut, like, where are you going from there? Like, because that's so, so good. But yeah, 100% recommend Eleanor Oliphant. I think it's such a beautiful story, and definitely brought a tear to my eye as well. Up next is actually a sequel, so I can't talk about it too much in depth, but that is Career of Evil by Robert Galbraith, aka J.K. Rowling. This is the third book in the Cormoran Strike series. This follows a private detective named Cormoran Strike who used to be a veteran in the army, but he had his leg blown off in Afghanistan, and he decided to leave the army to set up his own private investigation firm. And in the first book he investigates the murder, or supposed murder, or alleged murder of a model named Lula Landry who had fallen or jumped from her balcony. The second one was about an artist or a writer who had written a book basically exposing all the people in his kind of publishing firm, and he goes missing, so it's about that one. And then the third one, which is the one I want to talk about now, is about Robin, who is his kind of partner in crime, I guess. So originally she came to him from a temp agency to be his secretary, and things just kind of went from there, and she ended up being employed full-time with him, and she actually ends up being his partner essentially, and she is sent a parcel in the post, and when she opens it in his office, it's a human leg, and it's kind of about Robin and Cormoran are trying to find out what happened, who sent this, whose leg this is, and basically Cormoran has a list of 3 suspects that he thinks that it could be, but the police have come up with one suspect that they think is more likely, and he's pretty sure that's the one it's not. So yeah, I really loved this one. I thought it was really interesting. I love Robin and Cormoran's relationship and the way they bounce off each other. I think they're incredible, and I hate Robin's fiance. Just saying. I'm gonna put it out there. I don't know what happens at the end. Did they get married? Did they not? Who knows? Yeah, I loved this. Honestly, as I said, I can't really talk about it too much else because I don't want to give anything away. But It's incredible. I absolutely love the Cormoran Strike series. I know Lethal White, the 4th one, came out at the end of this year, so I really want to read that one. But yeah, definitely recommend this series. The penultimate one on this list is This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay, which again is a non-fiction one. And this is about Adam Kay, who was a junior doctor who worked for the NHS. And basically he wrote a diary throughout that time, keeping kind of a record of some of the cases that he had to deal with and the things that happened, and it talks about how the doctors are really stretched and how much pressure they're under, and it really goes into detail about that. There are also some quite funny cases that he has to deal with, which did make me laugh, and some really heartbreaking ones as well. People die and just some horrible things. It really touched a nerve with me because I think I have a lot of friends that work for the NHS, and I also work for a pharmacy, so we have a lot of dealings with the NHS and kind of doctor surgeries and things. And I do think it's really hard knowing how much pressure people are under, because that's a lot of pressure for one person, especially when these people are trying to save lives. So it was very difficult to read in that way. It did have the humour dotted in there, which I think really helped because it sort of lifted and lightened up a bit the mood of kind of reading that. I read it really quickly though. I think it's definitely a great present. Obviously not Christmas now because that's gone, but if you have like a birthday or something coming up for somebody and you want to know what to get them and you want to get them a book, I think this is a great one because it's really interesting, fast paced to read, but it also tells you a lot, and yeah, I think it's just kind of quick anecdotes which are really interesting, but like I said, it really does go into a bit more detail and I found it fascinating. And then the final book on this list, and the 10th book in my top 10 books of 2018, is The Disappearance of Emily Marr by Louise Candlish, which I read on holiday in July, and I've mentioned this book a lot of times. In fact, I currently have out of the library The Swimming Pool by Louise Candlish because I want to read something else by her because I loved that book so much. But basically this follows Tabby. Yeah, this follows a woman named Tabby who is trying to find somewhere to stay. She hasn't got anywhere to stay, and she's on this little island, and she sees a woman coming out of what she thinks is like a holiday cottage, and she goes away with a big bag of stuff. So she thinks this woman is going to go back to her kind of normal life and to leave her holiday cottage behind for a bit. And while she is stood outside waiting, sort of trying to like find a place to stay, she hears this woman reciting her the code to get into the flat basically. And so when the woman leaves, Tabby decides to go in and to stay there for a few days until she finds somewhere else to stay. And unfortunately for her, this is not a holiday cottage, and the woman comes back basically and finds her sleeping in her bed. And it's about then how they get to know each other, the things that happen. There's a lot of twists and turns. I can't say anything else because I really don't want to spoil anything. This was amazing, and I thought the mental health representation in this was absolutely on point. It was very respectfully done. I didn't think it was in any way exploitative, or it was kind of using mental health as any kind of crutch, which I thought was brilliant, because I think a lot of books kind of can't get that fine line, but I think this one perfectly did it. I really loved this book, and I haven't heard anybody else talking about it, so I think if you haven't read it already and it sounds interesting to you, definitely go ahead. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So yeah, so that is my top 10 books of 2018. I had a great reading year and read some really great books. So let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these, or if you have your top 10 list that you'd like to share with me, or just a couple if you don't want to share that many. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I am doing now videos Monday, Wednesday and Friday at 5 PM, so do come back on Monday when I upload my next one, and I will see you in my next video. Bye guys!